Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Sad Truth. Some of you might remember that a few days ago I posted a clip wherein I recounted some uh, interactions that I've had with Nobel Prize winners, most recently of which was my cab ride and conversation with Kip Thorne, who is the co-recipient of the 2017 Nobel Prize in Physics. Little did I know that a few days later, meaning today, uh, I would find out that one of my former professors at Cornell, Richard Thaler, has won the Nobel Prize in economics. And so I thought that I would just share a few uh, stories of my time with Professor Thaler. So this was in fall 1990. I had just started at Cornell. And as some of you might have heard me discuss in maybe a previous setting, my original goal when I went to Cornell was to uh, possibly apply mathematical modeling in studying consumer choice. I was very interested in consumer behavior, but given my mathematical background, the likely trajectory was that I would be a mathematical modeler. But I was also always very interested in the behavioral sciences, and so I was fortunate enough to uh, connect with my eventual doctoral supervisor, Professor Jay Russo, who encouraged me to follow the behavioral sciences. And so during that first semester, it was truly a formative semester. I mean, along with my whole training at Cornell was absolutely wonderful training. But during that first semester, I've often recounted the story of my having taken advanced social psychology with Professor Dennis Regan, and during that course is when he had assigned the book Homicide by Margot Wilson and Martin Daly, the two of the pioneers of evolutionary psychology, and that's when I had my evolutionary epiphany. In that I saw the parsimony, the elegance, the theoretical power of evolutionary theorizing, and then eventually I would use that to develop the field of evolutionary consumption. But during that first semester, I also took a course with Professor Thaler in behavioral decision theory. And so this is very much where I was first exposed to the axioms of rational choice as implicit, if not explicit, to Homo economicus or classical economic theory, and then all of the work as per Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and of course Professor Thaler and my own professor, my supervisor, Professor Russo, and many of the other folks. There was actually quite a strong behavioral decision research group at Cornell, which included Professor Thaler and Professor Russo and Professor Robert Libby, who used to apply behavioral decision theory in behavioral accounting. There was Professor Tom Gilovich, some of you may know him. I think also Professor Regan might have been part of that group. So there was really a strong group of economists and behavioral scientists who were interested in studying how to apply behavioral decision theory in a wide range of fields. And so, I was thrilled when I was taking Professor Thaler's course. Uh, I do remember, if I'm not mistaken, that it was in his course where we had to present a paper of someone else's work, and I had picked a paper by Paul Slovic, 1975 paper, that looked at what do people do when they are facing equally valued alternatives and how do they break the tie. And then that paper eventually led to my proposing my own research project, which led to my first set of conference presentations and my first publication. Let me just read them for you. So, my first ever presentation was at the Behavioral Decision Research and Management Conference at UC Berkeley in May 1992. And I remember that at that conference, I was wearing this huge cast because I had just earlier that year completely ruptured my Achilles tendon in a soccer tournament, which we ended up, if I'm not mistaken, winning. Uh, and actually, I think we were leading 1-0 in the game, and then the massive rupture of my Achilles tendon happened. So when I was at the conference, I was conspicuous, if only because I was undoubtedly the only guy there with a massive cast on. So at that conference, I presented a paper called "Importance of a Decision versus Cognitive Cost of Using a Heuristic." And then later in 1995, I presented the paper again. This work, the title of the paper was "The Importance of a Decision versus the Cognitive Cost of a Heuristic when Choosing Between Equally Valued Alternatives" at the Society for Consumer Psychology Conference in San Diego in 1995. And then that work, which the original genesis of it was in Professor Thaler's course, if memory serves me right, is what then led to my first publication in the conference proceedings, the proceedings of the Society for Consumer Psychology, page 41 to 48. So I remember very warmly that first publication and those first presentations. And so, of course, there's much to thank Professor Thaler here, for, precisely because he instilled the love of how to apply behavioral decision theory in studying human decision making and how it departs from the classical axioms of rational choice. But of course, there were other anecdotes, personal anecdotes that took place in my interactions with Professor Thaler. I remember vividly once going to his office and we were chatting, and he, if I may say, he was, I think, being quite complimentary about my talents, my academic talents, my intellectual talents. And he at one point, then he says, "Well, but in any case, I have no worries about you. I mean, you're Jewish, and all of the leading scholars in behavioral decision making are Jewish." I mean, that's actually a true fact, but he was just saying it in a jocular manner. Herb Simon, if I remember correctly, was Jewish. Dick Thaler, I believe, is Jewish. Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, you name it, they were all Jewish. And so I was somehow assured of success, if only because of my religious heritage. I think he meant it, as I said, somewhat jokingly. And then I remember also going to his office to discuss research projects, and we were planning on working together. And I very much regret that we never ended up working together. But one of the projects that he had proposed to me was to explore the so-called hot hand fallacy, the idea that when for example, a shooter starts becoming very very hot in terms of his shooting, is that really true, or is that a statistical perceptual bias, but it doesn't really hold? I can't remember the exact details of what it was that we were thinking of studying, but it involved some application of some heuristic and bias to the context of sports psychology. And then I also remember, I hope he won't mind if I mention this, but I'd like to think that he was mentioning it jokingly. I remember hearing from someone else who was at a dinner. This was in my last year at Cornell when I was out on the job market, and one of the places where it looked like I might get a job was the Harvard Business School. I was one of the people who had made the first cut and then made it to the campus visits, and then rumor was that I was on the short list for getting a job there. And apparently there was a party where people were discussing, well, do you think that Saad will get the Harvard job? And as rumor has it, and I know this on good information from someone who was there, who told me, he said, "Oh no, Gad won't get the job. He's too short, too differently weighted, and too dark to get the Harvard job." Now, I'd like to think that maybe he was joking, but it turned out that, at least again from what I heard, the reason why, or one of the reasons, if not the reason that I didn't get the job, is that I didn't ovulate. I don't think I've shared this publicly, but that's one of the rumors that I had heard at the time. But in any case, Professor Thaler was a fantastic guy in the classroom. He had a wit about him. I remember one time he was talking about Canadian currency, and he looked at me knowing that I was Canadian. I don't remember the exact thing that he said, but he said, "Well, is Canadian currency real, or is it monopoly money?" So he had this really sharp wit about him. And as you know, I'm somebody who enjoys a bit of banter. And so I always thought that he was a very, very cool guy. And of course, many people thought that eventually he would win the Nobel Prize, myself included. I wasn't sure if he'd end up winning it, given that Kahneman had won it in 2002. But of course, he's contributed his own stuff worthy of the award. And so, if Professor Thaler, you're watching, it was an honor to be in your course, and I do believe I got an A in it, and I do believe you saying some rather complimentary things about yours truly. So, thank you for having been my professor. It was a true honor to have been a student of yours, and congratulations on this wonderful achievement. There you have it. Today is, by the way, Canadian Thanksgiving, and so let's continue on that theme. I'm thankful to all of the wonderful, incredible educators that I've had the fortune of having in my life, all of whom, in their own either small or very large ways, have contributed to my intellectual development. And I hope that one day someone will be saying similar things about me and about other professors. I mean, we do what we do because we're very passionate about creating knowledge, but also about sharing knowledge. And so for me, it is wonderful to see one of my former professors being recognized for all of the pioneering stuff that he's done. So there you have it. Hope that you're having a good start of the week. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.